Coming to the end of the month on the theme of resilience. And I'm going to say this month has been its own practice of resilience itself. As we started with what came in from January, and that theme of resistance was unexpectedly relevant when folks chose these themes last year. It is fitting that this month has followed up with resilience. And as I shared on February 1st and earlier this month on resistance and resilience, there is an and. There is an and in the relationship between the two. My colleague, the Reverend Linda Susan Ulrich, says another way to think about resistance is that resistance helps us keep out the negative impacts, and resilience helps us bounce back from the negative impacts. Resistance helps keep out the negative impacts, and resilience helps us bounce back from the negative impacts. Resistance interrupts harm. Resilience helps us to respond when it shows up. And along those lines, we also gave ourselves the gift of pausing and feeling to acknowledge grief and its role in resistance and resilience. Grief of so many losses, they're personal, profoundly individual, but also social and civic. To be human is to lose so much all of the time. And the recognition of that fact, how much we lose, is part of connecting with the fullness of our lives, no matter how much we would wish that otherwise. It helps makes us fully human in this moment. And last week, we looked at resilience in the form of self-love, holding ourselves as precious and worthy and holy. All of these are practices in resilience. Now, today's note on that is not at all comprehensive, but sometimes we need reminders, including help me remember that my task as a preaching minister is not to try to say everything all at once. I'm working on that. But to speak to the moment. To speak to the moment. So in the practice of resilience, I have the question of what is the truth of our time and where do we go from here? I'm reminded in part of how there is a much larger picture, how the world has changed even as so much remains the same. Andrew Zolli, in his work, A Shift to Humanity, Resilience, and Expanding the Edge of Change, says, the ecological system, the economic system, the geopolitical system, the climate system, the food system are all connected to each other in ways that cause very complex, highly unpredictable, non-linear outcomes. All of those systems being connected leads us to a place where increasingly, instead of trying to find equilibrium in a planet that's out of balance, we also have to try and manage the unbalances and the imbalances. We have to manage in a world that is intrinsically out of order. And that includes protecting vulnerable people, especially from shocks and disruptions that are becoming the hallmark of this age. He says, the history of the 20th century was a history of huge explosion in human capacity. But think about this. You have a person who was born in 1900, had a lifespan of about 55 years in the West, and by the end of the century, that lifespan increased to nearly 80. We've also started to explore the atom. We have invented contemporary information society, for better, for worse. We have electrified the planet. So against that backdrop, you can sometimes forgive human beings for thinking that we're in control. that we have any kind of mastery. Not because we've solved every problem, but because there's a degree to which we think every problem is solvable. What's happened in recent years is that we have found that maybe we're not so smart. Maybe we're not. I love just having that question raised. And now maybe there's a shift to a kind of humility, a shift to a kind of humility that is beginning to ask questions. What are the steps that we can take to ensure that we manage around crises and risk, to recognize that there's no way to steer around the storms of our time, but how can we build something of a better boat or find something of a better path so more of us can survive? The storms include a long history of inequality and racial and other forms of oppression. And these are all storms of our own making. Humility includes realizing there is nothing new under the sun. Many of us have not felt so much of the impact of these systems of oppression until more recently. The depth of racism, for example, how little regard some people have for others. We're getting that revealed all over again and again just in these Epstein files, are we not? It was revealed during the Holocaust, wasn't it? And it was revealed when President Roosevelt signed the order to detain people of Japanese origin. Reverend Jesse Jackson and Dr. King were under no illusions of how people have been and are treated. Humans have such a long history of dehumanizing, of separating, of pitting one against the other, all for the benefit of few, for the sake of power and control. And this is part of the truth of the moment. This is part of being able to be equipped to respond, is to recognize what is before us. Timothy Snyder, American historian and author of the book on tyranny, is writing right now from his current work in Ukraine. Remember Ukraine? There's this place called Ukraine, and they're fighting for their lives. They're fighting for their freedoms as well as for ours, because they're a bulwark against Russia's reach into Europe. Timothy Snyder says, empathy is not moral luxury. Empathy is not a moral luxury. It is a precondition of freedom. It is a precondition of freedom. My best night, he says, in Uzhhorod was a public conversation about freedom with the human rights activist and journalist and philosopher Maxim Bukovich, who, despite his own pacifism, joined the Ukrainian armed forces after the full-scale invasion. Maxim was captured by the Russians and held as a prisoner of war for over 2 years and was made to suffer. He talks about his captivity when asked, but the other night his attention was really on others, on Americans. He had just come back from the US and was asked why we seemed flabbergasted, which was his word, by predictable forms of oppression, which he was kind enough not to say had been experienced by others. Snyder goes on. We remember others. When we remember others, they remember us. And when we remember others and they remember us, we have a chance to remember ourselves. This remembering is an enormous practice. The interconnection that Zoli talks about, the humility, the empathy, these are all paths to freedom, to self, to community, to a global perspective in a shifting world. So where do we go from here? One of the things we can do is be singing. It's be breathing. Sing for what matters for others and ourselves, as is the case with It's Okay to Change Your Mind. We remember our own humanity and we invite people into theirs as well. It is a chance to transform hearts, ours and maybe others. I'm reminded very much of Octavia Butler in this time. She is one of those elders, authors, and now an ancestor, a Black woman of the 20th century, who called us to move away from our deep human tendency for hierarchy and domination. Butler wrote mainly works of speculative fiction that addressed racism, systems of oppression, as well as predicted apocalyptic futures of the world on fire and how long it takes for humans to live up to the interdependent web of existence. It's going to take a long time. But Octavia Butler didn't just write fiction. She wrote blueprints for surviving and shaping a changing world. So I want to finish the notes about practice of resilience with a few of Butler's points shared from Trelawney Michelle. One of the first things we can do is simply pay attention. As we were talking about earlier, in the scope of things, in the frame of the human history, simply paying attention and being willing and open to learn all the time. That's a good start. One of our most powerful tools is to build community with intention. One of the conversations earlier, I'm going to call this anecdotal, but I appreciate the image, is how much people have been praising the mutual aid that has been responding to people in need, to people who've been afraid to leave their homes, afraid to go to work, afraid to go to school, and how much people have been supporting one another, making sure that there's at least some food, some assistance, some watching over the children at the bus stop, and more. And how much this speaks to the capacity for mutuality. If we can amplify that, we would go a long way. What Octavia Butler also says is don't deny reality. Don't ignore the context, don't ignore our history, don't ignore what we do with each other that's right in front of each other. Don't deny the degree of harm, the habit of human treatment of one another. Don't deny it. I appreciate how Heather Cox Richardson, people ask her how she can keep looking at history and keep looking at the world and keep commenting with such a level, thoughtful tone. And she says, if I have information, I can make a plan. If I have information, I can make a plan. So don't deny reality. What Butler also calls us to is to keep dreaming, even as we're in the nuts and bolts, even as we're in the creation, even as we're mired in the reality, there's also dreaming. There is also dreaming. Reverend Jesse Jackson would be the first in line to say this again to us too. There is also dreaming. There is also dreaming. And finally, as Butler would put it, God is change. God is change. We are not in a fixed destiny, but we are in it together. We are not in an immutable point in space and time. We are in a place of shift, and it can keep going, and what is now doesn't have to be forever. but what can be possible, we must be thinking of it in order to get there. We are not in a fixed destiny, we are in it together. So pay attention and learn, build community. Don't deny reality. Dream beyond the crisis. God is change. And maybe we just do this in a small scale, like keep singing. Like keep singing or keep dancing at the Valentine's dinner here at the church last Saturday. Or going to exploring the book Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. It's now being led by Jen McDaniel here at the congregation. Our task is to retain our humanity, to live humbly, and to commit to understanding how empathy is essential to liberation, to freedom. Empathy is essential to liberation and to freedom, mine and yours and everyone's. And along the way, we get to love fiercely in the process. In this moment, may we remember how much stronger we are together than apart. Trust that our connections sustain us in all moments, in every moments, even when we do not know the way forward. Let us go forth into the mystery, into love, into possibility, and keep being stronger and stronger again. Amen.